Okay, hello friends, and welcome to the Chabura. For those who are here for the first time, welcome. We're an online Bet Midrash comprised of international students offering cutting-edge Torah for you to learn anytime, anywhere. Just a note to say that if you're watching or hearing this public shiur on YouTube or podcast, know that the Chabura has a members component to it. This includes a whole range of exclusive classes for our members that are not publicly available. Aside from the unique curriculum of classes in video and podcast form, our members receive a free book shipped to them each year, have the opportunity to write for our journals, our books, attend live events, and to connect with hundreds of like-minded individuals from over 20 countries. In order to access all of this, you can become a member at thechabura.com/join, and I'll put that link in the chat box. We don't make a profit from any of our projects, so we appreciate the support of our members in ensuring the Chabura continues to provide cutting-edge Torah to a global audience. So if you enjoy what we're doing at the Chabura, please consider becoming a member today in time for our new curriculum beginning in September. Visit our website to find out more. Moving on to tonight. Tonight is our last Sunday special before our break and launch of new curriculum, and we have the privilege of having Rabbi Brendan Stern with us, who will be speaking about the fascinating topic of halakha and the Bitcoin revolution. A little about our speaker. Since his arrival in London, the Australian-born Rabbi Stern has taken the community by storm. The young dynamic rabbi's ability to convey the Torah's Eternal's teaching in a relatable and palatable manner has made him a sought-after fixture across a vast spectrum of the community. He has a unique ability to synthesize the timeless, the timely, masterfully navigating the most cutting-edge developments of business, medicine, science, and technology to bring the Torah alive in the 21st century. I'd also like to mention how this approach and the topic of the shiur fits in perfectly with the key feature of the classical Sephardi approach to Torah, which we aim to uphold at the Chabura, namely that Torah inhabits, speaks, and informs reality, and our Chachamim's willingness and ability to deal with the cutting-edge realities of our time through the lens of Torah. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you so much, Rabbi Stern, for being here with us. It is an honor, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ohad. Thank you to Sina and the team at the Chabura. It's a big zchut, big honor for me on a personal level to have been invited to this august forum and to share some Torah with you, those here physically, here virtually, and those watching in the future. So as Ohad said, the topic we're going to go through this evening or this morning, depending on where you are, this afternoon, is that of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency and some of the halachic aspects, halachic ramifications of this nascent and new topic, I guess. And as I was just saying a moment ago, when trying to prepare a shiur on a topic such as this, it's quite difficult because since it's such a cutting-edge topic and it's so new, even though it hasn't just started the last few years, but it's really kicked off with a bang over the last few years. So that there's very little literature, halachic literature on the topic. Doing my research on the topic, really the only big, well-renowned posek I could find that had actually dealt with it was Rav Asher Weiss of Yerushalayim. I believe he's got some connection to some individuals in the Chabura. And anyone that knows him knows that it's not a surprise that he would be one of the big world-renowned poskim that actually deals with this, because to really deal with these cutting-edge topics, you need to have an understanding of both the mitziut, of the reality, and also the halakha. Now, there are many Talmidei Chachamim around there who understand halakha very well, but in order to deal with a topic such as this, you really have to get into the nitty-gritty understanding of economics, understanding of finance, understanding of technology. And that's something which Rav Asher Weiss has been able to do to a great degree. And a lot of what I'm going to present this evening, I've picked up from him as well as some other sources as well. So before we go through the halachic topic of Bitcoin, I'm going to use the terms Bitcoin and cryptocurrency a bit interchangeably. But in order to do a bit of a deep dive into the halachic side of things, but to take a step back and understand a bit of the history behind money and the monetary system. And then once we understand a little bit of the history of the money system, then we can see what Bitcoin has come and tried to accomplish. And once we understand that a little bit, really on the surface level, we're not going to go in depth into Bitcoin and cryptos, but just see anyone who's not in the sugya, so to speak, they can understand what we're dealing with, and then we'll try to tackle a few halachic permutations of Bitcoin. So in order to understand that, we have to understand what money really is. So the truth is that money, we come to think of money as being coins, a 50-cent coin, a 50p coin, whatever the currency is in the country that you live in. But historically, money has no intrinsic value and was just something that was used in order to buy things. So that could be a metal coin like it's used today in many countries. It could be a piece of paper, it could be something as simple as a seashell, or as we have now, plastic cards, which we use with debit cards and credit cards, or coming up to with Bitcoin and crypto, it's just a string of coin. But the salient point is that money itself has no intrinsic value. It's rather it's something that is used by people in order to act as a medium of exchange. Therefore, money, the value of money is totally dependent on people using it, and therefore by it having social acceptance. If there's no social acceptance, it's not used in the society around you, so then it's irrelevant. So if you have a whole lot of notes, $100 US dollar notes, and then suddenly people stop using it, it's just a piece of paper at the end of the day. It has some numbers on it and some pictures and a few words of writing. But people start using something else, so then it just becomes paper ultimately. What does money do? What does it achieve? Money allows people to be able to trade both goods and services. So you can take money, whatever it might be, whether it's a seashell, whether it's a card, whether it's a coin, or it's a piece of paper, or a string of code ultimately. And you can use that if you want to get your haircut, not during the 9 days or the 3 weeks, but if you want to get your haircut, so you can use that which is socially accepted as money, you can use that to attain a service. You can go to a barber and the barber can cut the person's hair. And similarly, you can use it to trade goods. If you want to buy something from someone, you take that which is socially accepted as a form of currency, and then you can buy that, you can trade, or you can buy off someone else. The other value when it comes to money, the value is used in multiple terms, but the other good thing, so to speak, comes to money is that it's a means, it's an additional means in order to communicate the price of goods. So when you have a system of money, you can say this is worth one of the currency, this is worth 2, this is worth 5, this is worth 10, 50, 100, etc. So it's able, it helps you to communicate the value and the price of goods. And additionally, another positive thing to do with money is that it helps people store their wealth. When you have a system of currency, you're able to store things. So let's go a bit of history here. So historically, I'm not going to go into the years, and it's going to be very surface level, as I said before. Historically, there was a system that was called bartering that was in use. Now, bartering means that but bartering is effectively a way to trade goods and services. So if I have something and you have something, and you want what I have and I want what you have, so through the system of bartering, we can trade things. So if I, for example, if I have grapes, if I harvest grapes in my backyard, and you're a shoemaker, and I need shoes and you need grapes, you need the wine, so I can come to you and say, I'll give you X number of grapes in exchange for the shoe that I need of you. If I have something that you need, and you have something that I need, so bartering allows us to exchange. And that worked for many, many years when people had a particular area, a particular field that they focused on. The people were solely focused on grapes, and others solely focused on shoes, and others solely focused on wheat, whatever else it might have been. So bartering allowed people to trade for goods and services. But I don't always need to be buying shoes. I might need shoes once every year, or however many years it might be. They're able to use that to trade other things as well, and it became a trading process. So I could trade my grapes for your shoes, and buy lots of shoes. Now suddenly I have grapes and shoes in my storehouse, so to speak, and I can trade these shoes, which I don't need anymore. You can trade that for something else which someone has, and then ultimately you end up building up a big storehouse of multiple goods or multiple services that they're able to trade for other things. Now the problem with this approach is twofold, amongst others. Firstly, it's not so timely. So if I decide I need shoes, I'm going to trade you my grapes for your shoes. So your shoes might not be ready. It might take you a few days in order to get me the shoes which I need, whereas I have the grapes already in my backyard. So it's not so good from a timely perspective, because once you come to the marketplace, so to speak, you say, okay, you got something I want, I got something you want, let's make a trade. It's not necessarily there and then that you can say, okay, let's hand the goods over to one another. The second problem with the system of bartering is that when it came to storage, it wasn't so practical, especially when you're dealing with the days prior to refrigeration. So if you use something that has a lifespan that's only very short, and you have no method, you have no means of storing it because it's going to rot and spoil without any means of refrigeration. So then you only had a lifespan that was potentially only a few days or less even. So it wasn't so good in terms of being able to trade things, because you might spend a long time to get a whole farm, a whole field worth of whatever it might be, of the wheat or the grapes, but you've got no way of storing this. You have to be able to trade that really quickly. And it wasn't necessarily so easy to do that. So ultimately, this form of bartering that morphed into a currency. They used things which were easily tradable and durable goods. For example, they started using salt and weapons, things which lasted throughout different climates. They started using that as a form of currency, so to speak. And that also turned into gold as well. And these things people were able to store large amounts of that. So if you had a stockpile of salt, much easier to store salt than it was to store other things which are much bigger. And then gold became the so to speak gold standard, which people still talk about today. And then ultimately that morphed into what we call money today, we think of as money today. Ultimately, money, as I said before, is just a means of exchange, a communally accepted means of exchange. Then that morphed into money in the sense of coins. The value with coins was that it was easily transportable. And also you didn't have to have so much of it. You could have one coin, which could have a huge, immense amount of value. So if the community or the society decided this particular small coin in a particular shape was worth a huge amount of value, then you no longer needed huge storehouses of salt or huge storehouses of weapons or grapes or whatever else it might be. You could have one coin that could have the same value as something which was physically much bigger. And it was all pegged back to the gold standard. And therefore what happened was each area developed its own coin, which was used as the system of currency for that particular location. It's fascinating, really, in the last couple of years, that they found a coin coming back to the Bar Kokhba revolt. Anyone knows a bit of history, and particularly Jewish history. Bar Kokhba, he led a revolt on behalf of the Jewish people. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva actually thought that Bar Kokhba had the potential to be the Mashiach. He really thought that he was going to be the Mashiach. Eventually he died, he was killed, and history shows us that he wasn't the Mashiach. But Bar Kokhba was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. So they found a coin going back to the Bar Kokhba rebellion against the Romans. And the coin was obviously two-sided, like our coins are today. Now, one side of the coin had his name there. You can see this if you Google it afterwards, or if you get a bit bored in the next time period. Have a quick Google of this. You can see on the one side it has a picture of the Bet Midrash, as well as it says his name, the Bar Kokhba name. And on the other side, it says in Hebrew, it says Lema'an Yerushalayim, for the sake of Yerushalayim. And it has a picture of the Arba Minim. The picture of the four species of the lulav and the etrog and the hadassim and the arabot. Right, the four species that we know that we shake on Sukkot. The myrtle branch, etc. We put all together. The picture of the Arba Minim, the four species, on the one side of the Bar Kokhba coin. What's fascinating is that on this Arba Minim, on the picture of the lulav and the etrog, so it had a picture, on the picture it's got one lulav, one etrog, one hadas, and one arava. But one of each of them. The question is, we know we're going to be the next couple of months or so. And what do we do today when we take the lulav and the etrog, take the four species? So we do have one etrog and one lulav. But the custom is that we take 3 hadassim and 2 aravot. Whereas on the picture of Bar Kokhba's coin, we only had 1 hadas and 1 aravot. The question is why? We do 3 and 2. Why did he have 1 and 1 for his hadassim and the aravot? As I said before, we know that Bar Kokhba was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. There's a debate in the Gemara, Masechet Sukkah, of Lamed Daled. There's a machloket there, debate about how many of each of the species you're meant to have. Very technical debate based on the additional letter and a missing letter, and really nuanced based on the Sukkim in the Torah. But the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which we don't follow the halacha, but the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, based on his understanding of the Sukkim, is that you only have 1 of each. 1 lulav, 1 etrog, which we all do. And he says 1 hadas and 1 arava. And the other opinions is the way we hold. We say you have 3 and 2 of the last 2 species. But since Bar Kokhba was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, his teacher was Rabbi Akiva, so he followed Rabbi Akiva's shita. He followed the approach of Rabbi Akiva. Therefore, since Rabbi Akiva held that you only have 1 of each of the 4 species, that's why on the picture of the coin, Bar Kochba, there was only one of each. So it was following his Rav. That's fascinating historically, but it also just highlights the point that in each area, they had their own coins. In the area of Rabbi Kiva, where Bar Kochba was the physical leader, Rabbi Kiva was obviously the spiritual leader. Bar Kochba was he led the military campaign. So he was indicating, based on what they used to do in Rabbi Kiva's locality. So you see from here that every area had their own coin. So how did the monetary system develop from here onwards? So people start to realize that even though coins were much more useful than barter and trading goods and services, they still thought it was a bit sluggish, especially once you start traveling. So you have to carry a lot of physical things. You notice if you have a lot of coins in your wallet, it starts to feel heavy these days when people don't really deal with cash so much anymore. So then what happened was that banks started to print banknotes instead of coins. It became much easier. You could have a $100, £100 note. It's much easier than carrying a whole lot of 50-cent coins or 50p coins. And these are exchangeable. This banknote, which was printed by the bank, that became exchangeable. And this effectively acted like today's currency does. The only difference was that these banknotes were issued by the banks and private institutions rather than from the government. Now, this system also helped increase international trade. And ultimately, the governments caught wind of this and they realized the value involved. And the government started to issue money themselves. That's how we had the national and ultimately the international monetary system. And this really still exists to this day. The only difference is that we're now really dealing with a cashless economy. People just walk around with their debit cards and their credit cards. Now on the phone today, you can have Apple Pay and other similar forms of payment. So not only do you not need to carry coins around anymore, really. Not only do you not really need to carry that around banknotes anymore, but you don't even need to carry around the cards anymore because you can have that on your phone now. Ultimately, it's the same concept that when you pay for something on your card or off your phone, so it's really an IOU from your bank to the vendor's bank that you're buying the item or the service of. And they're trusting that you have the money there. And the other side trusts that your bank is able to remit payment of the money that's owed. Therefore, through this trust system, that's how the money system really works today. But really, it relies on trust that the bank's not going to go bust. Because if a bank were to go bust, then all the money that's owed, it can take a few days before money goes from bank A to bank B. If bank A were to go bust, so bank B wouldn't be paid and remitted payment for the goods and services which their client had given out. Now, this takes us to the final step before we get into the halachic topics, and that is how this morphed into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So in 2008, there's an anonymous individual going by pseudonym of Satoshi Nakamoto, and he started this virtual currency called Bitcoin. Now, I'm not going to go into all the intricate details of mining. First, we don't have time, and secondly, I don't fully understand it, if I'm being honest, but he capped the number of Bitcoin at 21 million Bitcoin. So effectively, this meant that you can't have, like we have in the current banking system, the banks or the government can just start printing more money. So what he'd made, by capping it at 21 million Bitcoin, it made it impossible to have anyone just start printing more money, and therefore you have inflation. Why? Because it was totally capped at a maximum of 21 million Bitcoin. And that effectively meant that the value is solely dependent on the value that people ascribe to it. Because if you have a government system of money, the government can keep printing more money, so then irrespective of what people think, the value of your money just becomes depreciated because of inflation. But if it's impossible in the system to print more money, it's impossible to put more Bitcoin into the market once you reach a particular threshold, in this case of 21 million Bitcoin, then it's impossible to have inflation. But that doesn't mean that the value of a Bitcoin can't change. Of course it can change, but it changes based on the value that people ascribe to it. I think it's worth more, I think it's worth less. It's able to be used in the economy, it's not able to be used in the economy. That can change the money. So that can change the value, sorry. It's not going to be changed externally, it can only be changed internally by the value that people ascribe towards this. This is totally decentralized from government. In order to approve transactions, it happens in-house by the system. If I want to trade Bitcoin to myself and yourself, so it doesn't have to go to the bank to check that I hold the money and then send it to the other bank, the government to do likewise. It's that the code goes out to the system, and the system checks that my anonymous code holds that money, holds that Bitcoin, and then approves the sale for myself to the person down the road, so to speak. This is just a little bit of a history of the money system background behind the money system and how it's developed over the years, from barter to gold to coins to paperless, and then to where we are today, with regards to the crypto slash Bitcoin system. Okay, so let's now pivot onto the halachic topics. So what I want to do is go through 3 halachic topics primarily. We might touch on some other tangentially. The 3 halachic topics are as follows. Firstly, to do with borrowing. So let's say, for argument's sake, that 7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever it was, I borrowed Bitcoin off you. I borrowed 10 Bitcoin off you, and the value of the Bitcoin was $500. If I'm not mistaken, about 6 years ago or so, you could have picked up a Bitcoin for $500. Let's say I borrowed 10 Bitcoin off you, and the value on the market at the time of each of those 10 Bitcoin that I borrowed off you was $500. Effectively, it was a $5,000 loan I took from you at the time, just packaged with 10 Bitcoin times 500. And now jump forward 6, 7 years, 10 years, whatever it might be. So the value of a Bitcoin today is approximately just under $20,000. A few months ago, it was up at 50, 60,000, fluctuates quite rapidly. But now it's 20,000. And now it comes the time that the loan, you're calling the loan in, and I have to repay you for those 10 Bitcoin that I borrowed off you 5, 6, 10 years ago. The question is, I'm going to repay you now for the Bitcoin that I borrowed off you. Am I repaying you 10 times 500, which was the value at the time when I borrowed off you? Or am I repaying you 10 times 20,000 or whatever today's value might be? In other words, do you look at the Bitcoin at the point in time of the borrowing, the value of the Bitcoin at the point in time of the borrowing, or do you look at the present value at the time of the repayment of the loan? And obviously, this will factor in when it comes to interest, which we'll touch on. That's the first topic I want to get through. Second topic, a little bit quicker, will be whether a man can be mekadesh a woman through crypto transfer. You know, when it comes to a wedding, that has to be something of value. So can you use a Bitcoin? Might not be so romantic, but can you use a Bitcoin for a man to be mekadesh a woman? And lastly, we need to understand if crypto transactions are halachically effective in general. Does halacha recognize the concept of an intangible transfer of funds or money? Okay, so let's go through the first topic. So obviously, very important when it comes to the first topic is that to do with interest. To know that there's a prohibition in the Torah of not charging interest. It's called ribbit. And Ashkenazi, if you don't want to sound like a frog, it's called ribbit. So in the Torah, primarily in Parshat Bahar, it talks about the prohibition against charging interest between a fellow Jew. It's interesting. It's fascinating that the Torah seems to link the prohibition against charging interest to Eretz Israel. Because you can't charge interest to a fellow Jew. So I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt and brought you into the land of Israel. Now, similarly, there shouldn't be any connection between the fact that Hashem took us into Israel and the fact that we're not allowed to charge or lend by interest. What's the connection between Israel and interest? The Rashi says that even though it's hard not to lend with interest, the market around you is all lending money with interest, so it's a very difficult thing to do. Nevertheless, Hashem took us out of Egypt on condition that we fulfill his mitzvot. And you should realize that it's going to be a great reward. Even though it's difficult for you to do, nevertheless, the reward, just like it took us out of Egypt, which was a difficult thing, and brought us and rewarded us by giving us the land of Israel, so too, when you're fulfilling a difficult mitzvah, don't worry, you're going to get a great reward as well. And the question is, well, Rashi could have said it's about any difficult mitzvah. Why specifically to do with interest? Must be something deeper, a deeper connection between the prohibition against interest and the land of Israel. So we need to understand there are 3 rules when it comes to not charging interest. So firstly, when it comes to stealing from a fellow Jew, so if you steal from someone, you violate 1 negative commandment, 1 mitzvah lo ta'aseh. But if you lend on interest to a fellow Jew, you potentially violate up to 6 Torah prohibitions. So it seems to be that charging interest against a fellow Jew is way, way worse than stealing from a Jew, which is fascinating. Because when it comes to non-Jews, the opposite is true. When it comes to non-Jews, stealing is way worse. According to the Rambam, at least, the Rambam holds that anyone that steals, if a non-Jew that steals, technically, the fact that it doesn't happen, technically you're chayav mitah, deserving of the death penalty. Why? Because stealing is one of the 7 Noach laws, Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach. And according to the Rambam, if anyone violates one of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, so chayav mitah, deserving of the death penalty. The Rambam says this is a reason why we know after Dinah was violated, Yaakov's daughter, the sister of the 12 Shvatim, she was violated. So Shimon and Levi, they go out and they kill all the people of Shechem. For discussion, do they do the right thing? Do they do the wrong thing? It seems to be that the father tells them off, but he also seems to only tell them off about their anger and their approach rather than the act per se. The Rambam explains that the reason is because they were chayav mitah. And one of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach is set up dinim, set up courts of justice. And since they didn't do that, they allowed this disgrace to happen in their area. So therefore, they were chayav mitah because they violated one of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. We see from here that when it comes to a non-Jew, stealing is way worse than interest. Stealing, technically, they'll be chayav mitah for. There's interest, not only they're not in trouble, but it's absolutely allowed. There's no problem whatsoever. When it comes to Jews, even if both parties agree, if I want to lend you money, you want to borrow money from me, you need it for your business or for whatever else it might be, even if you agree, it's still forbidden. Normally, when it comes to business transactions, both parties agree to some things, then that's fine. As long as they're in agreement, they sign the dotted line together, there's no problem. When it comes to interest, it's absolutely prohibited, even if they both agree. You see something fascinating here, that interest is such a severe sin for Jews. When it comes to non-Jews, it's no problem whatsoever. What's the logic? What's the rationale? If it's something which is objectively wrong, it should be wrong for us and for non-Jews. There's something not objectively wrong. Why is it such a serious prohibition for us, whereas it's nothing for the non-Jew? So the Maharal explains that Hashem set the system up as such because he wants us to look at our fellow Jews as being brothers. He explains just like one would hopefully lend to your brother. Your brother needed something, you lend to him without interest. Your brother or your sister would come to you and say, listen, brother, I need a favor, please help me out. You'd say, sure, whatever it is, whatever you need, I'm here for you. You're a brother, I'm going to help you out. So the Maharal says that so to Hashem set up a system, he wants us to look at our fellow Jew just like a brother. Just like you wouldn't charge interest to your own brother, hopefully. Practically, I don't know, but hopefully you wouldn't do that. So too, Hashem wants us to look at every Jew as our own brother, but look at it ourselves as one united nation. When it comes to the non-Jews, there's no problem with it, because objectively there's nothing wrong with it. Therefore, there's no prohibition against them charging with interest. As long as for a business deal and they all agree, they know what they're getting into, there's no problem. But for us, the problem isn't the act per se. The problem is that by charging interest, you're showing that you don't look at your brother as being integral. You don't look at your fellow Jews being a brother to you and being intertwined one and another. So what's this got to do with Eretz Yisrael? So the Maharal says that this notion of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh, that all Jews are intermingled and intertwined and responsible for one another. So that only kicked in this halachic mechanism that if you're lacking something, it's as if I'm lacking something. If you haven't made Kiddush on Friday night, and I have already, I can make Kiddush for you, because Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. Your lacking is my lacking. We see ourselves as being totally intertwined. So Chazal tell us that this only was activated, it's only started being once Am Yisrael entered into Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, we see that Eretz Yisrael is the place of Arvut, is a place of mutual belonging, of interconnectedness between one Jew and another. So even though the law of interest isn't limited to Eretz Yisrael, it applies everywhere. The Avnei Nezer explains that since Israel is a spiritual focal point, it's a spiritual center for all of us, even if we're living outside of the land of Israel. Therefore, the Torah connects the prohibition against interest to the land of Israel. So based on this, now we understand interest is such an important thing. We have to understand how interest would apply to our topic over here. Because if I'm charging you, if I'm repaying you for the Bitcoin, which I borrowed at 10 times 500, and now it's come to repay it 6-7 years later, it's now worth 20,000. So if I'm repaying you the wrong thing, we have a serious prohibition, a serious problem of interest. So Rav Asher Weiss points us to Gemara and Bava Metzia, Mem Daled. The Gemara and Bava Metzia differentiates between what's called tiva and peri. Tiva means currency, and peri means commodity. Literally means fruit, but it's used to refer to commodity. The difference between currency on the one hand and commodities on the other hand is huge, multiple factors, but particularly for our purposes when it comes to interest. So for example, if I borrow a currency off you, I have to pay back exactly the same amount of the currency that I borrowed from you. If I borrowed $10 from you 10 years ago, now it's time to pay you back 10 years later. So I pay you back $10. And in 10 years' time, if it comes to pay you back, if it's a 20-year loan, I pay you back $10, irrespective of inflation or deflation, irrespective of the relative value of the $10 now. I borrowed 10, I pay you back 10 when it comes to currency. But when it comes to commodities, you pay back the value of the commodity at the time that you borrowed it. Therefore, if, for example, I borrowed 100 apples from you 10 years ago, even though then each apple is worth $1, I'm not paying you back 100 times 1. I pay you back based on the value at the time that I borrowed. So the value of the apples may have changed between 10 years ago and now. I'm paying back the value at the time, not the number. I'm not giving you the 100, I'm giving you the value at the point in time. As opposed to when it comes to currency, you're giving the number of the coins, the number of the currency, as in the number of coins of the currency. When it comes to a commodity, you give the number of you give the actual number of commodity back rather than the value of it. If that's clear, if it's not clear, speak up. But just summarize, when it comes to currency, you pay back the exact amount that you borrowed, whereas when it comes to commodity, you pay back the value of the commodity. Now, the issur against ribit, against interest, applies both to currencies and commodities. So it's important to understand whether it's currency or commodity, because that will affect how you look at it. The prohibition still applies irrespective. So, for example, if I lent you 5 kilograms worth of apples, so then I can't make you pay me back 6 kilograms worth, because that will be considered charging interest, right? 5 kilograms and 6 kilograms, so that will be considered interest. However, midoraita, according to Torah law, you can borrow, use, and return the same amount of the commodity. You can borrow 100 apples and then return exactly 100 apples later. But midorabanan, because the commodity will change in value, so then that will be considered asur midorabanan, not on a Torah level, but on a rabbinic level. That's called se'ah b'se'ah, measure for measure. We see that the prohibition against interest applies not just for money, for currency, but also for commodities. So in order to circumvent this when it comes to commodities, so so to speak, a loan needs to be entered into based on the value at the time of the borrowing. So for example, if I want to lend you a whole bunch of apples, the way to do it is not say that I'm lending you 100 apples, but say I'm lending you $5 worth of apples, which might be 100 apples now. And then when it comes to repaying, so then you can repay me the $5. So there's a way of circumventing this. So now we have to understand, are cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin, they considered currency or they considered a commodity? We have to define what is a currency. So according to halakha, according to Jewish law, the currency is defined in one of two ways. Either it's something that the sovereign government of a particular country or area declare as the legal tender in that country, and or it's something which is generally accepted in that locality for the purposes of transactions. It's either something which the government declare is the legal tender, or something which is just used ordinarily in that area to transact. So let's now extrapolate this and bring this back to Bitcoin. You know, when it comes to cryptos, we said at the beginning that by definition they're decentralized. There's no government backing at all. By definition, they don't want any government backing behind it. So therefore, you would think that just like most foreign currencies, they're used or thought of in a country outside of its home turf, so to speak. So Bitcoin or cryptos would be considered a commodity relative to the local currency. Since there's no government backing behind it, so it should be considered a commodity. Just like if you're in America and you start trading British pounds or the euro or the shekel, so even though the shekel is considered a currency in Israel and the pound is considered a currency in the UK, but when you're in America, so the shekel and the pound will be considered a commodity that's relative to the dollar, which is used both as legal tender by the government-backed legal tender and also used for transacting in America. You don't transact in euro or pound or shekels in America. So those currencies that are currencies elsewhere will be considered a commodity within the country, within America. So too, we'd say over here that since cryptos are not government-backed, therefore they should be considered a commodity rather than a currency. However, it's interesting that in both El Salvador and the Central African Republic, they both recently accepted Bitcoin as legal tender. But these still, at least at this point in time, these are still anomalies. No other countries are using this at the moment. At the moment, there are 2 countries which are accepting it as legal tender. But outside of El Salvador and the Central African Republic, so you would think that Bitcoin and cryptos will be considered commodities rather than currencies. What about the second definition? That's something which is used to transact. So it's true that there are some companies such as Tesla, which have started allowing Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to transact in, but still it's not really so prevalent yet. Bit of a shtick, and it might be true for some companies. I think it's a bit of a hard ask to say that it's something which is really used as a form of transacting in general society. And also, furthermore, most people buy cryptocurrency as an investment rather than for purchasing power. People buy it because they think they can sell it at a higher price later. They don't buy the Bitcoin because they think, oh, I can buy a Tesla with this. They buy it because they want to make money, and maybe once it's gone up in value, they might use that to buy a Tesla. But again, it's not really used so much. So it seems to be that cryptocurrencies will be considered a commodity rather than a currency, except maybe in El Salvador. So, and then the other proof as well would be that the fact that capital gains tax is payable, at least I know in the UK, you'll pay capital gains tax on transactions on any capital gain that you've made through cryptocurrency. That shows you that's a commodity rather than a currency. So now let's go back to our first question. How much am I meant to repay? I borrowed 10 Bitcoin off you 6-7 years ago when it was worth $500. Now it's worth approximately $20,000. How much do I have to repay you? So it would come down to whether you define it as a commodity or you would define it as a currency. Now, since we've said that you're defining it as a commodity, you would only need to pay back the value at the time of the borrowing. Whereas if you were to define it as a currency, I'd have to give you back 10 Bitcoin now. Even though the value of the 10 Bitcoin has changed, if you define it as a currency, I have to give you back 10 times 20,000. But since, as we said, you would define it as a commodity, not a currency. So then when it comes to a commodity, as we've explained up until now, commodity, you repay based on the value at the point in time that the transaction took place, that the borrowing rather took place. So therefore, I would only have to pay you back 10 times 500 rather than 10 times 20,000. But if we were both in El Salvador, for example, where it would be considered a currency, so then I have to pay you back 10 times 20,000. It's fascinating. You see that's really changing. And between the time that I prepared this shiur a year or so ago and now it's changed. El Salvador wasn't considered, there wasn't legal tender over there. You see that really there's a massive nafkamina, a massive practical ramification based on where you are. And it could be that other countries are going to start implementing it just like the Central African Republic and El Salvador have. So if you want to repay the Bitcoin, so the trick is to make sure you're not in El Salvador for now. Make sure that you're in a country, you do it in a country where it's not going to, you don't think it's going to be considered legal tender, and then you're only going to have to repay back based on the value at the time, as opposed to in El Salvador, you have to pay back 10 times 20,000. The rest of the world, you don't have to pay back 10 times 500. Okay, that's part number one. Let's move on to part two. And that is, as we said, the question of whether you can use Bitcoin for Kiddushin. Can Bitcoin be used or cryptocurrency transfer be used when it comes to the transaction of a marriage or the husband being Mekadesh a woman? It's the Chazal, the very, very beginning of Masechet Kiddushin, says that man can be Mekadesh a woman by giving her anything of value. That's whether it's a currency, you can give her $10, or it can be a commodity, or even theoretically, you can give a service. If you provide a service, you can be Mekadesh a woman through the service that you've provided. Additionally, if you transfer the rights to a debt from a third party owed to you, so if a third party, someone else owes me a particular debt, I can transfer that to a woman and say, hurry up, with this debt, which Reuben from the outside owes me. That can still work as long as it's done in the right way, as long as it's worded in the right way. You see from here that the main thing they have to provide value has to be positive, has to be worded in a positive way, as opposed to forgiving of a debt. So if a woman owes me money or owes a particular person money, you can't say, hurry up, but behold, you're betrothed to me by me waiving that debt that you owe me. That's considered negative, even though it's still financially, there's no net difference between saying, here's $100 or I'm waiving the debt of $100 that you owe me. It has to be done in a positive way, as sages tell us. theoretically, you would see it would look from here, as long as the right wording is used, the transfer of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency a man would be able to be Mekadesh a woman for doing this. Again, it might not be the most romantic thing in the world. You ping a little transfer over, but theoretically, it should be able to work. The only question is, does a fluctuation in price matter? So we know if you ever look at a halachic wedding, so the Masada Kiddushin, the rabbi that's officiating at the wedding, he'll bring the Eidim or bring the witnesses in, and before the man says Harat Mekudesh, he shows them the ring. He'll say, do you see this ring? Who owns the ring? The groom will say the ring is mine. And then he'll say, is it worth a shavet? Is it worth just a nominal amount? And they'll say, yes, it is. And then she knows that it's got a baseline value. And then the man will take that ring and put it on the woman's finger and say, Harat Mekudesh li taba'at zu. Behold, you're betrothed to me with this particular ring. But the reason that the Masada Kiddushin, the rabbi officiating, he says to the witnesses, and is it worth a shavet pruta? And says to the groom, is it worth a shavet pruta? Is because you want to know that it has a particular baseline value. The question is, does a fluctuation in price in Bitcoin, does that prove to be a problem? Because she might think, okay, he's transferring me a Bitcoin and it's worth $20,000 now, or was yesterday when I took a look at it. But now it's jumped up in value. China decided that they're going to allow Bitcoin to use, and suddenly it's doubled in value. And you see, these things can happen overnight. It can grow massively in terms of the value, or go the opposite direction as well. It seems to be that it's not really a problem, because all you need to do is know at that point in time how much it's worth. Again, it's not the most romantic thing, but there shouldn't be any problem, shouldn't pose a problem, and the mindset should work as long as the woman can see the current price there and then, and she knows what the price is. So theoretically, you should be able to use that. Do we have a question in the audience? Robert, is there a question there?
I've got a few questions. So I don't know if you want to take them now or later.
See how hard they are.
Sorry? Okay, well, a question on your immediate conversation. This is a very intangible value. Does that present a problem? I mean, is it really hers? Can people actually own the Bitcoin? Is it owned by the Bitcoin, some sort of third party? So even if he transfers it from her account to his account, does she really have it?
Very good question. That's actually the third part, the very next part we're going to get to now, is transacting intangible items. We're going to answer that question in the section coming up now.
So we'll leave that one and I'll ask you a couple of my other ones then. Going back to the case in El Salvador, right, where Bitcoin is also... So if I've understood you correctly, there's a particular Gezerah the Rabbanan that says we don't return the commodity, we return the value of the commodity. So in other words, even if I wanted to make a contract with you in apples, where I say I've lent you 6 apples, and in 10 years' time return me 6 apples, we can't, with the Rabbanan, we can't do that. Was that you're correct? Even though in Doraita we can, the Rabbanan we don't do that. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a way around it, but what we do is we return the value of those 6 apples at the point of the loan of those 6 apples.
Right. Okay. So when you've got a situation where something is both a commodity and also a currency, could you not end up with a situation based in where one person is saying, I want to pay you back in whatever the currency of El Salvador is, and the other person saying, no, I want you to pay me back in Bitcoins, depending on which way works and the benefit of each party. Because one could argue, it's a currency, it's both a currency and a commodity, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. I didn't want to get into the Gemara because it's a little bit technical, but the Gemara basically says that you can have like gold, silver, and copper, where each of them can be a currency or a commodity relative to the other one, depending on how it's used. So silver can be considered a currency relative to gold, but a commodity relative to copper, or vice versa. It depends it's all about the context. So too, just how the euro can be a commodity relative to the dollar, but in Europe it's considered a currency. So it depends where you are. So the interesting question would be, what happens if you're in El Salvador and I'm in England? Then whose jurisdiction do you go by? I don't know the answer.
But even if we're both in El Salvador, I would argue that it is both a commodity and a currency, and therefore you could end up in a you know, or you saying that once it's a currency, it can't be a commodity by definition?
Correct. Yeah. In that place, it's either one or the other in that particular place.
Right. So even though there's another currency, this is a second currency and it's
Correct,
no longer
yeah.
a commodity.
So in El Salvador, it'll be a currency. Elsewhere, other than the Central African Republic, it'll be a commodity. But yeah, so it's either one or the other in that particular place.
So we then have this problem, right? So if you live in America and I live in England, and we have a transaction where I loan you dollars, then, you know, which jurisdiction do we take? Because in one jurisdiction it's a commodity, in the other jurisdiction it's a currency.
Yeah, great question with regards to the interest component of that. I don't know. You need to discuss with a Choshen Mishpat Beit Din. I'm not sure what the answer to that would be, but it's very important to know these things, especially for people that are transacting in foreign exchange and similar matters, because there's massive ramifications.
And it's quite a common. Surely it's a common. You know, it must be a common circumstance, right? That you've got people who are loaning dollars to someone who doesn't live in the US, and then the exchange rate moves and they pay them back in dollars and they may have paid them interest.
Correct. That's why interest is a huge thing. As I said, there's up to 6 prohibitions involved, but people don't realize the areas that it does extend to. So people don't think to ask the question. But if you take nothing else out of this, it's worthwhile just being on the shield just to know that to ask the question when it comes to anything which possibly might be an interest-related matter, to ask a qualified person, Rabbi or a dayan that knows the topic, because there's so many different ramifications and really depends on the situation. Yeah. Okay, let's I'm just cognizant of the time a bit. Let's just move on to the final section, and hopefully they'll answer your first question, Robert. And that is to do with transactions in general. So does halakha consider transacting with something intangible to be halakhically effective? This might be slow. I'm going to say now, what I'm about to say now might be slightly technical, so try to stay with me. If you lose me, don't worry, I'll sum it up at the end. We're going to do a little bit of lamdanut, a bit of lomdas. So there's a Gemara at the end of Masechet Bava Batra, which talks about the halachot related to what's called a shchiv merah. That is someone that's literally on their deathbed, and they start sort of giving out instructions about transactions on their deathbed. So normally, when it comes to a transaction, if I just verbalize something to you, it doesn't really count, because you haven't gone through the proper methods of kinyanim. Haven't written it out, there's no witnesses there necessarily, you haven't done a kinyan, lifted anything up. But if someone's on their deathbed, there's a special dispensation to allow people to bequeath certain things and provide kinyanim or give over kinyanim to other people, even though ordinarily it wouldn't work halachically, but because a person's a shchiv merah, they're on their deathbed, halakha considers it to be viable. So the Gemara says, at the end of Masechet Bava Batra, the Gemara says that if a shchiv merah, you have this person on their deathbed, and they give away the rights to an individual to live in one of their properties, or to eat the fruit from one of his trees that he has, the Chazal say that the transaction is invalid. The person's on the deathbed, they can't say, I hereby give you the right to use one of my rooms in the house. He says that before he passes away. So the Rashba asked the following question. The Rashba was on the Sfadi Rishonim, Rabbi Shlomo and Abraham ibn Aderet, was a Talmud of the Ramban and Rabbeinu Yonah, I think it was the chief rabbi in Spain, if I'm not mistaken. So he asked the following question. He says that Chazal elsewhere tell us that one can retain rights to an airspace even though they don't own the field below the airspace. Right? So I can own the space above a particular property even though I don't own that property. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger asked the following question. He says, how does this comment of the Rashba make sense? It seems to contradict what we just said in the Gemara. The Gemara says that I can't give over, a person on the deathbed can't give over the rights to smelling the fruit or to owning the fruit of a tree, to eat the fruits of a tree or to live in a particular property. A person can't give that over because the transaction is invalid, because you don't own the main thing, you can't own the byproduct of that thing. If you don't give over the tree, you can't give over the rights to eat the fruit from the tree. So how does that square with the fact that the Rashba says that a person can own the airspace without owning the main thing? It seems to contradict the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva Eiger asks. The explanation is as follows. The Rambam says that you can't transact with an intangible item. for example, I can't say I've got a beautiful smelling etrog. I can't sell you the smell of the etrog. Why not? The smell is intangible. I can sell you the fruit. I can sell you the etrog. I can't sell you the rights to smell my etrog. It's intangible. You can't transact with an intangible item. And similarly, I can't sell a loan to someone else. You can't sell it. A loan is something intangible. Someone owes you money, but it's an intangible. There's nothing tangible there that you're selling. However, if a loan is done through a thing which is called a ma'amad shloshtan, you have three people there, a technical halachic thing, then it can't be done. Right? As long as it's done with a shtar, with something physical there, so then it can be done. But otherwise, you can't sell a loan because it's intangible. So Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, or Rabbi Chaim Brisker, he says, you see from this Rambam that even though normally you can't sell something that's intangible, that's only because it's lacking a shtar, it's lacking something physical. There's a lack of documentation that's being transferred over. But if the loan were to be transferable, so then let me rephrase that. I didn't phrase that so well. So you see from the Rambam that loans are transferable. The only reason ordinarily doesn't work is because there's no shtar there. Now, if loans would not be transferable at all, the fact that you have a shtar wouldn't help you. The fact that you have a document wouldn't be of assistance. So you see from here that intangibles, says Rabbi Chaim Brisker, you see from here that intangibles, they can be owned. The only problem is that they can't be transferred. You can own something intangible. It's just difficult or impossible potentially to transfer an intangible thing. You can own something intangible, but you can't transfer something intangible. Therefore, based on this, he explains the Rashba. He says that I can sell a property to you, but keep the airspace above it. Because when I own the property initially, I own everything there. I own the ground and I own the airspace. Now, since I own the airspace along with the property, I can sell the property and maintain the airspace, even though the airspace is intangible. Because intangibles can be owned, they just can't be transferred. As long as I already own that intangible, I own the airspace above the house, with the house, I can get rid of the house and maintain ownership over the intangible. I can't sell that intangible item. I can't sell that airspace. I can't sell the fruit from the tree without selling the tree. Because you can't transfer something intangible, but you can own something intangible. You can own something intangible. So let's extrapolate this to Bitcoin. Based on this, if we were to stop here, you would think that you shouldn't be able to buy or sell something intangible such as crypto. Money, even though if I ping you money or I do a bank transfer, you'd say it's also intangible, but it's not really because the bank have an IOU and the money is in the bank. But here, when it comes to Bitcoin, it's just a whole bunch of code which is attributed to me. So based on this, you would think they'd be prohibited to trade with a crypto. The Maharshal says that no, that this prohibition against trading something intangible, that's only when something that's intangible that could become or will become tangible. But something that will never become tangible, it says then you can trade, you can transfer. And it says furthermore, we have a notion, a halachic notion of what's called a situmta. The Gemara in Bava Metzia and other places talks about. Situmta basically means that you follow the local marketplace. See if the local marketplace says that shaking hands is considered a form of transacting. So that's a situmta, that's the local method, and therefore you follow that. So therefore, based on this, based on the Maharshal, we should seem to allow transacting with crypto. However, there's a sefer called the Pischei Tshuva, and he says that really there's a debate about whether situmta, about following the local marketplace, whether that's effective to perform a transaction on an intangible item. There's some say it works, some say it doesn't work. And the middle position is that it only works when Dina de Malchuta Dina accepts it. Now, based on this, let's bring this to Bitcoin. Since Bitcoin is intangible, so ostensibly, you shouldn't be able to purchase it unless one of two things, unless you rely on the Maharshal, who says that you can trade something intangible that will never become tangible. And Bitcoin is always going to remain intangible. Cryptos will always remain intangible. Therefore, you have to either rely on the Maharshal that says it will therefore work because it's never going to become tangible, or alternatively, you have to rely on the assumption that situmta works for intangibles since the local marketplace accepts it. Now, all this is only relevant when it comes to purchasing Bitcoins with other currency. In other words, can I buy Bitcoin with my pound or with my dollars, with my euro, with my shekel? But what about actually using Bitcoin to purchase other things? In other words, you've got two directions here. You've got using quote unquote normal currency to buy crypto. this we can say that it can work either by assuming, like the Marashal, that since it'll never become tangible, it's fine, or that Situmta, local marketplace, accepts it, so therefore be fine. But what about the other hand? What about using Bitcoin or using crypto to purchase a good, purchase a car, purchase pizza, whatever else it might be? It's called a kinyan kesef. Can you use a Bitcoin or crypto for a kinyan kesef for buying something, for buying good or service? The Gemara Masechet Kedushin Daf Chavav, the Gemara says that when it comes to real estate can be acquired either with money, documentation, or with chazakah, with established use. When it comes to metaltalin, which are movable items, that can only be acquired through what's called a kinyan meshicha, when you actually pick up or move the item. So therefore, we see from here that when using Bitcoin to purchase something, the movable items wouldn't be an issue, because all it takes is for you to pick up that pizza. I ping the pizza man a Bitcoin, and I pick up the pizza, so therefore I've acquired it, and there's no problem there. The question is, can I use a Bitcoin to buy real estate? Because again, one of the three ways you can acquire real estate is with money. So will we say that it would work? Can you use something intangible when there's no transfer of money, but there's a transfer of a Bitcoin over here? So it's interesting that there seems to be a contradiction in the Rambam. We'll finish with this. This will be the last thing we do. The Rambam, on the one hand, in Hilchot Ishut, the Rambam says that a man cannot be mekadesh a woman with funds that he's loaned her, because these funds belong to her, and therefore there's no physical benefit that he's giving her. So you can't say that I'm as we said, I think we said a bit earlier, a man can't say to the woman that I'm going to let you off that loan on condition that you become married to me or betrothed to me. Haram mekadesh by me waiving that loan. The Rambam says that it doesn't work. Rashi explains because forgiving a loan is not enough. But the Balei HaTosfot explained that the benefit, if a man says Haram mekadesh li, behold, you're betrothed to me, with a benefit from the loan no longer being payable. In other words, it's a bit of a technical get around, but by changing the wording, not just that by me forgiving the loan, but through the benefit that you receive by me forgiving the loan, then it does work. I guess that's a Rambam on the one hand, that normally you can't be mekadesh a woman through just forgiving a loan, unless it's done in a particular wording. There's a Rambam elsewhere in Hilchot Mechira, the 7th parak. The Rambam says, what happens if you have Reuven that owes money to Shimon? Right? Man A that owes money to man B. Then Shimon says to Reuven, okay, you owe me money, but you have something that I want. So sell me this thing which I want from you in exchange for the money that you owe me. Do you owe me $100? Shimon says to Reuven, but I want this very expensive pizza from you in exchange for the $100 that you owe me. So I'll buy the pizza off you, and then we'll call it even. The Rambam says that that's considered like a proper transfer of money, a proper transfer of cash, and therefore, even though it's considered totally fine, it's a valid kinyan. Now the Rabbi asks the question. He says, why is it when it comes to forgiving a loan, it works? The Rambam says it works straight away when it comes to mechira, in Hilchot Mechira, when it comes to money things. Someone owes me money, so I can waive that for the transfer of something physical. When it comes to Kiddushin, when it comes to betrothing a woman, the Rambam says it doesn't work. The Balei HaTosfot would say there's a way around it if you word it properly. But the Rambam says it doesn't work. You can't just forgive a loan and betroth the woman through that. But you can forgive a loan and take something physical. Why does it work for the taking something physical? It doesn't work for betrothing a woman. For the Avnei Miluim, he says, when it comes to Kiddushin, the critical component is the benefit. As long as the husband or the groom provides a benefit of monetary value, so then it's considered valid. And if not, it's not considered valid. When it comes to property, when it comes to movable goods, the main thing, the critical component is that there's a transfer of ownership involved. So let's bring this now to Bitcoin. So based on this, it would say that there's no issue using Bitcoin to purchase goods. According to the Rambam, for property, it will be a valid transaction because all it takes is that physical funds are moved. Sorry, take that back. You don't need physical funds. It's rather transfer of ownership. As long as we transfer ownership, just like when Reuven says to Shimon, don't worry about that money that you owe me, just give me that pizza and then we'll call it evens. That's a transfer of ownership and therefore works. So based on this, you would say that not only is there no problem of buying Bitcoin with money, again, based on the Marashal, that it's not going to become tangible, therefore will be fine, or based on the assumption that Situmta works, the following the marketplace works. But even using the Bitcoin or using the crypto to buy something else, that also wouldn't be a problem, based on what we've said. Just to really top level summarize, for now, at least in most countries, would say, is Bitcoin considered, or cryptocurrency is considered a commodity or a currency? It would say that outside of El Salvador and the Central African Republic, Bitcoin will be considered a commodity, not a currency. And therefore, has big ramifications in terms of repaying when it comes to borrowed money. But again, there are a lot of moving pieces involved, and things are changing very rapidly. Not only the price of Bitcoin change very rapidly, but also the acceptance changes very rapidly, and potentially could change extremely rapidly once a few big countries were to get involved. If they were to get involved, then there'll be huge knock-on effects across the globe. So it's the kind of thing that you really need to stay in touch with. And the poskim, I think, above and beyond Rav Asher Weiss, I think are going to start paying big attention, even if it's at the back of their mind, paying attention to this, because once it starts to take off, or if it starts to take off, so then the halachic ramifications totally change from one end to the other. Anyway, thank you very much for joining. I just want to show you just how you see the halacha has to deal with all the moving pieces when it comes to technology, comes to finance. And it shows you just through the eyes of a posek, not myself, but Rav Asher Weiss and a few others that are dealing with this, shows you that the poskim have to really have a clear understanding of the halacha, not only the halacha, but the mitzvot of the reality on all aspects. And only once you really understand the reality, then you can see how to apply the halacha in accordance with the reality and show that halacha has what to say across everything, whether it's science, whether it's medicine, whether it's business, whatever it might be. The Torah and halacha has what to say about everything. But you need a true and thorough and in-depth understanding of the reality that you're dealing with in order to understand how to apply halacha accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. That was extremely insightful, and really shed light on an area of halacha, and I have no idea about. Does anyone have any questions, comments? I'll start off with one, which, according to the opinion which would view Bitcoin as something intangible and nothing really there, how would that relate to stealing? Meaning, if I steal, that obviously it's bad to steal, but do I have to pay back anything? It's like
so Rav Asher Weiss discusses this, and he says straight out, he said, yeah, theft is theft, whether it's tangible or intangible. He said, if there is a way to go in and steal someone's code, then it doesn't matter whether you're stealing apples, doesn't matter whether you're stealing coins, banknotes, or code. Theft is considered theft, irrespective.
But if we consider it, if we compare it, for example, the rabbi spoke about smell. Like you can't take me to Bet Din where if I smelled your something good, and you're like you stole from me. So if it's considered like that, then how do we deal with that?
Yeah, but there's still ownership. There's no ownership of I can own the nice smelling thing, and then the smell is an intangible offshoot of that. But if someone steals your Bitcoin, then they now have it, and you no longer have it. So right. So then it's proper theft.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay. So I think we are good. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you so much, Rav. That was extremely insightful, and we hope to have you again many more times on the Chabura. And everyone, make sure to sign up for next curriculum that's starting up in September, and we hope to see everyone there. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.